While I will vehemently disagree in almost every single case, the fact of the matter is there's a number of performers and bands that I listen to that many of my friends have labeled as unlistenable. In one way or another, these performers push the boundaries on what is music to such extremes that the actual question of whether there is musical form or value to their sounds comes into question. While people like to call it unlistenable or non-musical, the fact of the matter is, in almost every one of these cases, the band is just so non-traditional and avant that you really have to dig deeper and listen closely to understand exactly what they're doing. And at the end of the day, these are all bands that I thoroughly enjoy, so if you're truly looking to push your musical boundaries, these are groups you need to listen to. There's no better place to start than with the king of weird and avant and experimental himself, Mark E. Smith, and his band, The Fall. To be honest, this is the one band that I usually warn my friends about before I play them, as they are about as odd yet completely accessible as any band you'll ever hear. The Fall have actually been recording since the mid-1970s and have had over 60 members over the years, and while the lineup has constantly changed, the music itself, while always going experimental, has stayed relatively consistent. From dark, almost looming rants over heavy synth sounds, to high-paced, almost out-of-control guitar and rhythm bits, absolutely nothing is off-limits to The Fall. And most of the time, the vocals of Mark E. Smith are the most intriguing aspect of the music. Whether he's ripping off a provocative religious allusion or spitting venomous rants on a wide range of subjects, his often slurred speech is one of a kind, and there's no question that The Fall have recorded one of the most uniquely challenging but absolutely phenomenal catalogs in all of music history. Beyond the worlds of heavy metal and thrash, you have a genre often called grindcore, and there's no question that the most important group in the history of that genre is Napalm Death. If some people have difficulty getting what heavy metal is all about, then the ferocity and power that Napalm Death brings will be outright alien. Yet at the same time, the energy and drive that this band brings is beyond almost any other group in history. The music of Napalm Death is absolutely devoid of filler, and they always bring with it a heavy trudge sound that brings smiles to the faces of headbangers across the globe. But even in what seems a very harsh musical environment, the musical elements themselves are never lost. And it's this balance between noise and music that shows the sheer brilliance of Napalm Death. Though many will not hear it as anything more than screaming over chaotic music, the fact of the matter is there is a beauty and a form to the music of Napalm Death. And if you're looking for something beyond heavy metal, this is the group you need to know. On the opposite side of the musical spectrum, you have the most defiant man in the history of jazz, Sun Ra. Constantly combining new sounds and approaches, the music of Sun Ra brings to mind everything from funk to jazz to soul, and it's the way that he layered the sounds that makes his music so unique. It's also the manner that he brought all these different sounds together that made many jazz traditionalists turn from him, along with the fact that oftentimes the band took to stage in full costume and many people began to question whether he really took music seriously. However, when you break down his compositions, there's no question that there is a very strong jazz formation across all of them, and they are clearly beyond genius in their instrumentation. While jazz was always thought to be this open, completely experimental style of music, the fact remains that Sun Ra pushed the boundaries further than any other performer in the history of the genre. And while he still often gets labeled as unlistenable, the fact of the matter is, once you dig in, you see the sheer brilliance of his work. The next group I'm going to talk about is Suicide, and when it comes to the idea of completely stripping music down to its core, nobody did it quite like these guys. And they in many ways defined the no-wave movement of the late 1970s. Taking equal amounts from the Stooges and the Velvet Underground, the duo of Alan Vega and Martin Rev created patterns and textures that were previously unthinkable. It's the unsettling rhythms and deep synth tones that make the music of Suicide so captivating. And the equally distinctive, almost poetic vocals of Alan Vega are like nobody else you've ever heard. In short, Suicide proved the idea of sound over style, and songs like Frankie Teardrop and Rocket USA remain absolute classics to this day. The last person I want to talk about is a man by the name of Rune Lindblad. Now, this idea of challenging music actually goes back decades and decades, and you can really see the beginning of it in the so-called musica concrete music that you can trace all the way back to the late 1920s. But there's no question that Swedish composer Rune Lindblad is one of the most important, and his early works in tape manipulation and electronic music know no peers. In fact, when his music was first performed live in 1957, it was labeled as pure torture. It's in this idea that you can see his efforts as almost punk, as he was going against everything anyone thought was music at that time. The patterns and moods he creates are impossible to describe, and for those looking for a musical approach like nothing you've ever heard, you have to know Rune Lindblad. So those are a few of the more non-traditional groups that I listen to. Every single one of them has a phenomenal recorded catalog that if you're really into music, you have to be familiar with. And in the next few months, I'll be giving you more groups that, while not exactly easy listening, are well worth knowing.